The reading is from John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41. It will be on the screen, but you can also find it in the Bibles in the pews. John chapter 9, reading from verse 1. As he, Jesus, went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him now how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." They still did not believe that he had been blind and that he had received his sight until he sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been born blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciples. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as to this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and that those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What, are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Now, that was a really, really long reading, but it was all about seeing and not seeing. And now, that's something, your eyes, that you just take for granted if you've got them, haven't you? If you can see normally. But our eyes are actually amazing. Here's a picture on the screen. Thanks, Holly. Does anyone know what that is? That is something that turns your vision upside down. If you put them on, everything would be upside down. The floor would be on the ceiling would be on the floor. If you'd have started wearing them just before the Queen's Jubilee, do you know when you would be able to start seeing things normally again? They did an experiment. People wore these glasses, and at first, everything was upside down, but within 10 days, so by today, if you'd started on the Queen's Jubilee, people who are wearing those glasses could see the world perfectly normally again. Their eyes and their brains had turned this thing the right way up. That's how amazing eyes are. Even if you turn it all upside down pretty quickly, your brain compensates. But our eyes can also get a bit confused. Here's another picture on the screen. Just look at that for a second. That's weird, isn't it? Is it a man's face looking in front or looking to the side? Which one do you think? Front or side? What my bid? Anyone? Is he looking to the front? Well, of course he is. You can see his eye. Is he looking to the side? Yeah, because you can see the side of his nose. Our eyes very quickly can get confused. And sometimes our eyes struggle to see the things that are right in front of us. At the end of your pews, you should have, if you pick it up, a picture of a tree with some faces in. I'm going to give you 1 minute to work on your pews. Have a look at the picture and work out how many faces you can see in the tree. I'm going to time 1 minute on my watch. Ready, steady, go. Oh, it's the answer. And time up. Who got more than 5? Who got more than 7? Who got more than 9? Who got more than 11? If you had your hands up, then you'd be lying. Because the correct answer is, thanks, Ollie, I'm sure you've all seen them. There are 10 faces. But when you looked at it, I showed this to Eliza this morning. He said, there are 2 faces in that tree. And then you keep looking and you see, oh no, there are a lot more. Apparently these are national leaders, but we don't know quite who they all are. That might be Gandhi, number 7 at the top. But these things were right in front of you. And you had to stare at them, didn't you? And keep on looking and looking so that you could see them. So our eyes can get confused. Now the thing that the Bible passage, John chapter 9, is really getting us to think about this morning is the question of how do we come to see the truth about Jesus. Jesus is right there in front of us. We're reading about him in John's Gospel. In the passage we read, there are people who saw something amazing that he did. He opened a man's eyes who'd never been able to see before. Now for some people, seeing Jesus having done that, seeing that sign that he performed, it led them to believe in him. Like the man himself. By the end of the story, he's worshipping Jesus. And yet at just the same time as that, there are other people in the story who see, if you like, the same sort of things, but they end up throwing that man out and thinking that Jesus is someone that even they should get rid of. They should bump off. They don't want anything to do with him. Now, why is that? Why is it that people can see the same things, and come to totally different conclusions when it's right in front of their eyes. That's what we'll be thinking about both in here and over in St. Monica's. So kids, if you're aged 3 to 11, now's the time for you to get ready to go out. Take your time, don't rush too quickly. The rest of us will stand and sing our next hymn, which has a line in it which you'll be able to pick up from our reading. Let's stand and sing Amazing Grace. Please do take your seats. And because it's a long reading, it might be particularly helpful if you want to have the Bibles open at the end of your pews to John chapter 9, as we think about it a bit more together. How do you start seeing something that's right in front of you? It's kind of a strange question, isn't it? But that's the question I think that John 9 invites us to consider. Could it be that there are things right in front of us that we can't see? And if that is true, how does that change? John 9 is a story really of 2 or even 3 miracles. The first miracle is obvious. The man has his physical sight restored. But that, if you like, is all done by, well, verse 7 really, or even earlier. Certainly by the end of verse 7, that miracle is over and done with, yet the chapter goes on. And there are 2 other, if you like, miracles or strange things that we have to explain going on. One is how the man goes to spiritually, if you like, see Jesus as someone more than just another man. And then how do these Pharisees go from, if you like, sight to blindness, so that they end up the chapter arguing with Jesus, having thrown this man out and denied what's happened just before their eyes. Someone's sight has been restored. So how is it that these miracles of seeing happen? As I've been reflecting on this chapter, which feels like a really important chapter in John's Gospel, we'll come to why that is in a second. 3 sort of big ideas that seem to be coming out. The first is that Jesus is someone who always works in the midst of darkness. That's really what's sort of how the chapter is set up. This man who's blind from birth. And his disciples' question, which feels, pretty harsh today, would have been one that everyone in Jesus' day would have shared. That if someone has some kind of physical disability, it must be evidence of some sort of sin in their life. Some way that they, or perhaps their parents, had rejected God and he had afflicted them with this. That's what's going on in verse 2. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind. And what Jesus doesn't do in verse 3 is, if you like, directly answer the question anyway. It would be a mistake, I think, to read it saying, no, it wasn't his parents, it wasn't him, it was God himself who afflicted him. It's more complicated than that. But what Jesus seems to be saying in verse 3, this happens so that the works of God might be displayed in him. He denies a simple kind of cause and effect between anything this man has done wrong or his parents have done wrong and his affliction. But what he does say is that this painful situation that this man is in, even this can be the context for God to be at work. So this darkness that is from birth come down over him. And all that sort of follows from that, in terms of not being able to engage well with society, you can just begin to imagine, can't you, in a society that didn't have the sort of either the technology or the concern that ours would have around disability, would just be a very, very, very difficult society to live in if you were blind or if you were deaf or many of the other disabilities we see Jesus engaging with through the Gospels. But even that darkness, maybe especially that darkness, is a context in which Jesus can work and God can do incredible, wonderful, amazing things. And that seems to me to be a source of real comfort. What should be a source, can be a source of real comfort for us. Because there are all kinds of ways in which situations that life throws up for us do feel, have felt like situations of darkness. Where, if you like, the shutters come down The blinkers come on, and we just can't see where we're going. It's the sort of images we use all the time, isn't it? I can't see a way forward here. We feel blind in that sense. We feel like we're, wading through fog. That's another sort of set of images that are often used when we're in the grip of, say, mental illness. Brain fog, as if things are coming over us that we can't see where we're going. And when our circumstances create situations of darkness with our moods. If this miracle is, if you like, opening us up to the way God works and how God brings people from unbelief to belief, like in the case of this man, then if our situations have been or are in any sense dark, what this chapter I think begins with is saying, do not lose hope. That very dark situation, that very situation where you feel like things are bleak beyond description, even that can be the context in which God can work and bring amazing good. So there's comfort here. But right alongside that comfort, there's also, I think, a challenge or a call, if you like, to humility. Because again, if this is more than just someone's eyes being opened, someone being able to see, if in some ways it's a sort of picture of how people come to know the truth about God and believe the truth about God and, like this man, come to worship God, then the fact that Jesus, if you like, uses this imagery of being blind and then coming to see tells us something, I think, quite uncomfortable about who we are as human beings. I think it says something to us like this. Whether we know it or not right now, there are things in our life about which we are blind. And before Jesus coming to work, and apart from Jesus being at work in our lives, we're going to be in the dark. And the real challenge, I suppose, is that the Pharisees are people who don't think they're in the dark at all. Do you hear it at the very end when Jesus meets them again? What? Are we blind too? They can't believe that Jesus might be giving them this kind of diagnosis, that they've got a problem. But there is something about the human condition which means that apart from the work of Jesus, we're in a situation of not knowing, not seeing, not understanding, about which we may not be aware. We may think we can see perfectly, but we're much more like the blind man when it comes to God. In 1945, April 1945, American soldiers liberated the first of the Nazi concentration camps that they reached. It was called Ohrdruf. And General Patton, when he began to see the extent of what had happened there and the darkness and evil, he decided that they needed to record it and they needed to bring it to light, and particularly to show the German people the sorts of things that had gone on. And so they went to get the residents of the local town, led by the mayor and his wife, and they showed them the concentration camp. The next day, the mayor and his wife were found hanged. And there was a note, they'd left a note alongside, which simply said this: we didn't know, but we knew. We didn't know, but we knew. And okay, that's a very extreme example. But you see the way in that context, when people, in the face of darkness, if you like, contorted their moral sense to, at some level, being unaware of what was happening just up the road, but at another level, knowing all too well. You know, those were ordinary, if you like, ordinary German people. We can get into all kinds of details about how it is that, if you like, a whole nation was of ordinary people were led to that kind of point. But surely it says something about the human condition, that even in the face of such wickedness, you can, if you like, blinker your own eyes from seeing what's right in front of you. That, I think, is the sort of challenge that Jesus offers us here. You know, are we so different in our own way? We have the privilege, the blessing of not living in a cultural context where that kind of just heinous wicked evil is, if you like, just up the road. But there are all kinds of ways in which we cannot see the darkness of our own world, of our own hearts. And if we take what Jesus is saying seriously here, as well as the comfort that that darkness is not a kind of a barrier to God working, but might be the very context in which he works, there's also a challenge, a call to humility. Do you see the world truly, really, apart from Jesus? And even as Jesus has begun to open your eyes, if you know him, where are the parts of your life, the parts of your view of the world, where actually you see far less clearly than you think? One of the things I've always, I think, struggled with since I've been kind of growing up as a cradle Anglican, coming to Anglican churches all my life, I've always found the confession at the start of an Anglican service quite difficult. It feels like we kind of start our service beating ourselves up before we can be happy again in a few minutes. But as I've reflected on what this chapter is teaching, it seems to me that confession as a regular habit that you take seriously and don't just kind of go through the motions with is precisely what's needed if Jesus' diagnosis of the human condition here is true. If there's something in us that tends towards blindness but thinking we can see, then one of the very most vital and best things we can do is time after time, day after day, week after week, come to God and say, Lord, we don't have the resources to make sense of the world. We don't see the world as it really is. Come and change us. Come and, as Jesus did with this blind man, open our eyes, cleanse our hearts. That's the point of doing it week after week. So Jesus works in the midst of darkness. That's the first sort of big theme of this chapter. The second theme that has sort of jumped out at me, I suppose, is this, though. Not only does he work in the midst of darkness, the work that he does is restoring our humanity. The work that he does is restoring our humanity. Because it's really interesting in this chapter, the way that Jesus heals the man. You might remember in chapter 4, we saw him heal a royal official's son from a distance. Like he deliberately said, I'm not going to come with you, and just go home and you'll find your son healed. And, we saw that was quite a significant point. He didn't want to be seen as a sort of miracle worker who needed to do these incantations and be up close to the person to bring about the healing. It was a way to invite that royal official to really trust him. And yet here, one of the next miracles, one of the important miracles that John records for us, well, he goes into a bit of that rigmarole, it seems. After saying this, verse 6, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Why does Jesus go through that? Why does he have to? I mean, it's weird. It's pretty gross, again, particularly in the wake of coronavirus. I think I'll just, leave that, Jesus. Leave you with your spitty mud and find some other healer. What's going on? Well, I think that the clue is, and this is where you need to kind of be thinking about other parts of the Bible where these sorts of things are coming up. At the beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis, we see God making humans out of the dust of the earth and breathing life into them. And that seems to me to be what Jesus is doing. He's reminding us of the creation of humanity. His breath, or his spit, the mud, the clay, the dust, these two things come together. And it's through that kind of creational agency, ordinary things, dust, and then God's spirit, God's breath. That's how this man is healed physically. And that note of kind of Genesis 2, creation of human beings, is, if you like, supposed to work in this chapter as a bit of a guide to everything that happens next. Because if in the physical healing of this man's sight, we're thinking this is a restoration of his humanity. This is a Genesis 2 sort of moment. Here's where that point seems really important. That in the rest of the chapter, as he, after having his physical sight restored, if you like, gets his spiritual sight restored to see Jesus and eventually to worship him, we're supposed to be thinking it's the same sort of means. It's his restoration of his humanity that is helping him get clear on Jesus. And if you read the rest of the chapter, that's exactly what happens. And this is why this chapter feels so important. Because from that verse 7 on, right the way through to verse 35, Jesus is off the stage. It's the longest part of John's Gospel where Jesus isn't there. We don't know where he goes. He sort of disappears. And the rest of the chapter, up to the part where Jesus meets him again in verse 35, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, and their conversation carries on, it's just the man with now his eyes restored and a whole load of people arguing with him and ridiculing him even and questioning him. And as he kind of faces their questions, as he's under fire in that way, he starts to think and reason out and work out what's going on. It's a very, if you like, ordinary miracle. It's so ordinary that we don't often think it is a miracle. But just listen to how his opinion of Jesus changes. So in verse 17, his first sort of guess about what's happened to him is the man they called Jesus. Sorry, I've got that wrong verse there. Verse 11. The man they called Jesus made some mud. The man they called Jesus, he could be any guy, but he did this amazing thing. But that's it. As the sort of the questioning, the pressure rises, the ridicule, verse 17. Well, they come back to him. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he is a prophet. So his opinion of Jesus has just started to shift. He's not just a man they call Jesus. A prophet, someone sent by God, someone significant. Verse 33. Again, arguing, ridiculing, debate. He has this sort of amazing kind of reason under fire, where he's like, you're saying that he must be a sinner, but God doesn't listen to sinners. He couldn't be just some other guy. He must be a man who is from God. That's verse 33. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And that idea of being someone from God, I think, is an even bigger deal than just being a prophet. Someone who sort of sent by God with even more authority. And then verse 37, 38, when finally he sees Jesus again, he's desperate to believe in him. Do you believe in the Son of Man? For a Jewish audience, that's like the very highest connection with God you could have. Someone sent right from God to earth. And Jesus, in fact, takes it higher and said he's not just a great king, he is the Son of God himself. And verse 38, his response is to fall at his feet and worship, which would have been an extraordinary thing for any Jewish man to do, to fall at the feet of another man and worship him. But you see, a miracle has happened right before our eyes as we're reading it, and we almost miss it. He goes from saying Jesus is just another man to Jesus is God, and I will worship him. And the point is that amazing miracle happens through the ordinary human means of thinking and talking and people ridiculing him and disagreeing with him. But that is how Jesus works, this miracle. The physical miracle is, if you like, the clue. He's restoring his humanity, and he's doing it through ordinary creation things. So it is when this man comes to believe in Jesus. Now, of course, right alongside that man coming to see Jesus as he really is, the Pharisees also come to get Jesus completely wrong through the very same means. So it's not as if you just start thinking about Jesus, you're bound to come to believe in him. But I think the point is that by the Spirit of God, by God working in ordinary ways, our ordinary faculties, our ordinary thinking and talking and reasoning and working it out and disagreeing and being ridiculed can be ways in which God works to bring us to real, true, powerful faith. It takes a miracle, but the miracle happens through ordinary things. And why I think that's so important is because it's very tempting to sort of treat the ordinary stuff, and maybe particularly the stuff about, being a follower of Jesus and belonging to church, that makes you feel weird and makes you sort of think that other people around you are sort of, looking down on you and thinking less of you. It's tempting to think that all those things are kind of either irrelevant, they don't matter. What really matters is a kind of intense spiritual experience I might get every now and then in my life. Or we even think that when we're under fire for having faith, when we think that people are thinking less of us because we're followers of Jesus Christ, that somehow things are going wrong, that somehow this isn't the life that God is calling me to. So just this Friday gone, I was taking the kids to school, got talking to one of the parents as we were sort of dropping off, and they said, "Oh, what have you got on today?" And I didn't sort of think very much about it. I said, "Oh, I'm writing my sermon for Sunday." And I could see that their eyes glazed over, like, what a weird thing to spend your day doing. And at that point, I'm like, why didn't I say something cleverer that would have sort of, showed that I'm a really kind of thoughtful, interesting person, rather than going home to write a sermon? Who does that? But you'll have the same thing on Monday morning. I can say to people tomorrow morning, "I went to church yesterday," and they're like, "Of course you did. You're a priest." But you'll have the same thing. If someone asks you tomorrow, "What did you do yesterday?" "I went to church." Eyes will glaze over. It can be tempting to think that those things are like, those weird moments are just like, that's not the way it should be. In one sense, those times when we feel different from the world about us, that's just what it means to have Jesus at work in your life. That's what happens for this guy. And they don't need to be sort of moments where you feel like your Christian faith is somehow less. But maybe, just maybe, God will work in the midst of that weirdness. Don't be put off by it. Which leads me to the third thing about this chapter. Just thinking about what our part is. If this is a chapter about coming to see Jesus, where would we fit in? If we want to see Jesus for the first time, if we want to see Jesus more in our lives, we want to have that kind of tangible connection with him, how do we get that? It just seems to me that what happens with this guy is he thinks about it and he has courage to follow his conclusions, if you like. I said this was the longest section where Jesus is off stage. And because of that, it seems to me that it, if you like, embodies or sort of fleshes out what for all of us the sort of situation is with Jesus. You remember at the end of John's Gospel, there's a verse that a sentence John gives us to explain our situation now. These are written, what's in this book are written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And that's exactly what's happening in chapter 9. Jesus is off stage. He's not sort of physically right in front of this man. But everything that happens to him leads him to the point of believing that Jesus is the Messiah, and by believing he gets life. And so it is for us, in, if you like, almost the same way. Jesus isn't here physically, but we can still come to have faith in him. We can still grow in our faith. In, I suppose, all kinds of not very flashy ways. We just consider what is said about him in books like John's Gospel. And we're brave, if you like, to follow those conclusions through, even if we find that lots of other people might disagree with us. But as we do that, then like this man, we can come to a point of saying, Jesus, you are this man sent from God, God himself walking the earth, and we can fall at our knees and worship. That's what we do when we come to church. If you like, church is where this sort of all ends, and we say, God, as I've been considering you and learning about you, I acknowledge you're God and I want to worship you. Church, if you like, is where this all comes to a kind of a climax. It's also where it all begins. And so we go out tomorrow and we are prepared and ready to find that people all around us disagree with us, and yet we are confident to keep on following our conclusions through about Jesus and live out our faith, even if that does bring us into tension with the world around us. Let me finish with a story that the evangelist Becky Pippert tells. She was meeting with a lady called Sue who was investigating Christianity. Sue was a grad student, and Sue was really struggling with some of the difficult sort of teaching of Jesus, particularly this one. If anyone wants to steal your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And she thought, what am I supposed to do with that? That feels really hard. How do I respond to that? And Becky Pippert just challenged her and said, look, why don't you just try putting that into practice today? And so Sue prayed a sort of prayer. She said, listen, God, I'm going to do what this verse says. If the opportunity arises today, I'm going to do it to find out if you exist and if Jesus really is who he says he is. Amen. And then she went on with her day. And she was a grad student, so she went to the library and started working at a desk there. But then someone came in and basically said to her, I want that desk. That's the desk I want to sit on today. Give it to me. And for a moment, she's like, how dare you? You can't just steal my desk. And then she remembered that verse. And she said, okay, you can have the desk. And so she kind of gathers up all her things, takes them away, and starts working elsewhere. The guy who sits down and has the desk obviously starts working, but then he's like, that shouldn't have happened that easily. So he goes up to her later in the day and says, excuse me, I just got to know, why did you give me the desk? And Sue says to him, look, this is going to sound really weird, but I've been investigating Jesus to find out if he is who he says he is. And I read this verse where he says, if anyone steals your shirt, give them your coat as well. And I realized that, if I'm going to take Jesus seriously, I was supposed to let you off and even throw something extra into boot. And he says, but listen, you're just having the desk. Don't you dare ask for anything else made. And he goes, why on earth would Jesus say something like that? And almost without thinking, Sue said to him, look, if there's one thing I've learned about reading about Jesus and meeting some real Christians, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: Jesus will give you a whole lot more than a desk if you would just let him. And she said, like that, just having said that, it's like, I get it now. I understand why Jesus is so wonderful. It all makes sense to me. To the extent that, if you like, we can follow in Sue's footsteps and listen to Jesus and take his teaching seriously and put it into practice and follow the conclusions, even if, like in her case, doing that brought her into real tension. To that extent, we can see Jesus more clearly and worship him like this man does. Let me lead us in prayer, and then Anne will come and lead us in prayers of intercession. But let's just have a moment quiet before I pray. Lord God, we thank you that you are someone who opens eyes to see you. Thank you that through this physical miracle, we not only see your power as the Creator God, but also the way that your power works in unseen ways, less obvious ways, as we use our brains, as we encounter disagreements, people who think differently from us, and yet as we follow our conclusions about you and about Jesus Christ through. Lord, please would you show us this week how we can, like this man, be brave in holding to what we know to be true about Jesus Christ. And through that, Lord, would you bring us even greater certainty and confidence and joy that results in worship of you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, Anne.